All right. Okay, so we are here. It is being live streamed. Yes, it is. And I'm going to share my screen in just a minute. No, actually, let me do it like this first. Okay, here we are, chapter 6. Now I can share my screen so that everybody can see it. All right. So here's the deal. We're doing Targumei Esther. There are 2 Targumim to Megillat Esther. One of them was probably written around the same time that many of the other Targumim were. The Targum Tanakh that we have today was written by the Tana, Yonatan ben Uziel, who was a contemporary of Hillel and Shammai, maybe plus minus, okay, but before the Churban. Targum Onkelos is post-Churban, but probably still in the time of the Tanaim. Some of the Targumim to the writings, meaning to the Megillot, etc., are not the work of Yonatan ben Uziel, and therefore they're probably later, but most probably they're known, they're referenced, etc. So probably done by the time of the beginning of the Gemara period. Targum Sheni is later. We don't know exactly when Targum Sheni was written. Some people put it as early as 500 or so in which would put it towards the end of the period of the Gemara. Other people put it as late as actually post the Gaonic period. I personally, not that I've done a tremendous amount of research on it, but there's a reference by one of the Gaonic, okay, which would put it around the year 750, something like that. There's a reference during the 8th century to 2 different Targumim of Megillat Esther. And from the description of them, it sounds like the 2 Targumim that we have today. So I would tend to believe that it existed by then. When exactly it was written is another story. All right. So what we're going to do, the way we do this is we read a verse in the Megillah. I have that showing on the screen, on the left-hand part of the screen. And then we're going to read the first Targum. And then we're going to go take a look at how the second Targum is different from the first Targum. In the first year we did this, we did chapter 1. That was all we got through. It was a miracle we got through chapter 1 because it was really, 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 really long and very descriptive, and it was really amazing. And there's all sorts of stuff in there about Shlomo HaMelech and David HaMelech. I think they had nothing to do with the Purim story, but you would be wrong. Welcome. So I've already started talking about the structure of what we're doing. We're going to read a verse in the Megillah. We're going to read Targum Rishon. We're going to read Targum Sheni. And then we are going, and please, if I fail to translate something, or if you have a question as to why they're doing what they're doing, or what the difference is, or whatever, please speak up, unmute yourself, and ask away. Anybody who watches this on recording, if I failed to answer something that you wanted answered, please write to me. either privately on WhatsApp or my email if you have it, or Facebook, however you want to get to it, and let me know. And I will try to address it next week, or if it's a really private question, I'll address it in writing, or pick up the phone and call you. So we left off last year. So anyway, so I was saying the first year we did this, we only got through one chapter. The second year we did chapters 2 and 3. Last year we did chapters 4 and 5. And we left off with this sense of impending doom. Now, those of us who know the Megillah, right, we know the story comes out okay in the end, but as we were reading through it, like, it was really the sense of mamish impending doom. And Esther, for the Jews who know, many of them don't, but for the Jews who know that Esther is Jewish, it looks like she's gone over to the dark side. It looks like she's trying to save herself at the expense of everybody else. She's cozying up to Haman. And of course, Chazal say that this was intended to push Am Yisrael to cry out to God, because if they were counting on her to save them, and now it looks like, oh, she's not going to do it, so they don't have anybody else to turn to but HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so we now are between the two nights, between the two banquets. In the last chapter, Haman and the king came to one banquet. The king offered Esther anything up to half the kingdom. Esther said, just come again tomorrow. I'll tell you what I want tomorrow. And here we are. It's the night in between the two. So the text in the Megillah is B'layla hu nadadash shnat hamelech v'yomer lahavi et sefer zichronot divrei yamim yiyu nikraim lifnei hamelech. Simple understanding in the flow of this melodrama story that we have is, on that night, the sleep of the king was disturbed. It was restless. Okay. And he said to bring the book of the memoranda book, sort of the chronicles, and they should be read before the king. That's interesting, right? It's in a sort of passive voice, that you nikraim, they should be read, not and you should read them to me, but and they should be read. And the reason I'm pointing that out now is because we're going to see how, actually it's going to be Targum Sheni more than Targum Rishon is going to use that as something to expand on, to sort of to give us a story as to why the language of the Megillah is specifically like that. But before we get to Targum Sheni, we're going to do Targum Rishon. And in an unusual switch, Targum Rishon is much longer for verse Aleph, for the first verse, than Targum Sheni is. So we're going for it. Be Belelia Hahu, Dat Shinta de Malka. Bo Belayla Hahu, right? Like we say, here we say Bo B'yo. On that exact day, come that day. Okay, so this is Bo B'laylahu. On that day, the sleep of the king was, right, Nadad. Nadnad is a seesaw. Okay, it was restless. We first see this verb in Hebrew by Cain when he's told that he's not going to be able to stay in one place. You almost hear nomadic in this nad kind of thing, okay? So it's restless, it's without rest. You can't stay in one place. That's this notion of nadada. Okay, the sleep of the king. Bo b'layla kahu nefat porkana lihudai. On that night, there went out a salvation for the Jews. Be'Bulalia, Idabrat Sarah Levete de Avimelech. On that night, Sarah was taken to the house of Avimelech. If you know the story, Sarah and there was they went to Avimelech and Grar, and the king thought, and that's one of the places where Avram says to Sarah, please say you're my sister. And so they think that they're sister and brother, not husband and wife. And so they take her to the king, that she should be in the king's harem or become the queen or whatever. And God intervenes. Baruch Hashem. But on that night, that's what happens. Okay. Be'Bulalia Hatlu kol buchure de. On that night, right? Because these are things that the Chumash tells us happened at night. All of the firstborn of Egypt were killed. Okay, we just heard about that in the parsha. Be'Bulalia hahu idgalia nevuan leneviin v'chelmin l'chelmei chizayah. On that night, at nighttime, the nevuah was revealed to the Nevi'im, and dreams were given to dreamers of vision, right? Visionaries. Happens at night, and they wake up and they go back to sleep. So, talking about Yosef, talking about Paro, talking about other people who receive close to nevuah in dreams. Messages and dreams, possibly Daniel as well, right? Be'Bulayahu itragish alma kule medinan kol diarehon evla rabba bakol kachaya mispeda violala bakol medinta ulemin asirin v'sakin savin v'safin savan shakfin al libhon Kulhun, Savchin, Bemer, Bakal Rav, Yalin. Wow, this is a long one, right? What's happening on this night? Va'amrin, vai, oi. Okay, Chazinan, Haka. Anyway, it keeps going. So I'll read the details in a minute. Let's go back and put it into some English here. On that night, we've revealed. Okay, on that night, the entire world was stirred up. Okay, Regish is like sensitive in modern Hebrew, but it's more like the word roges. Okay, Regish in Aramaic is more like the word roges in modern Hebrew, of being mightily stirred up. Okay, not just sensitive to something. The entire world. From the judgment, and all of the inhabitants there was a great deal of avelut, of grief. In all of the large cities, there was eulogies, and there was wailing, right? Wailing. We call Medinata Ulemin Asirin, in all of the provinces, the cities, city-states, the youth, Assyrian Basakin, they dressed themselves in sackcloth. Sabin Basavan, Shakfin, Alibon, the elders, male and female, right? Grandfathers and grandmothers, like tore their clothing to reveal their hearts. V'kulon svachin b'mer v'kalva miyalin, and all of them were crying out bitterly and with a great voice. Miyalin, again, it's this kind of wailing, but also the word for talking. Miyamalel. Oh, look at that, somebody else. Okay. Hi, Rachel, we're down to here. Feel free to stop me and ask questions if you need to. Okay, and they said, whoa, the chazinan, that whoa, we have seen Aka. Aka is like Sarah. It's I'm not going to get into why Ayin Kuf is the same as Tzadi Ayin, but take my word for it, it really is. It's a tsar. It's and tvira al tvira, and brokenness on brokenness. Umitavrana kadma'a la at itasenan, and the first shattering wasn't yet healed. Umachatana la it yahiva, and another blow wasn't la it yahivat asu, wasn't given enough time to be able to be healed. Umi madvana la it nachamna, and from this, right, medva, this terribly depressing, horrible thing, we were not yet consoled. The keve libana la avru minam, and the pains of our heart did not pass away from us. What is this horrible thing that happened at night that has us in such sorrow and pain? De Kiryat Avatana Ritisha Al Ara, because the city that we loved is in ruins, down to the ground. It's been completely destroyed. Umaktasha Sagar Sana'a, and the holy place has been the hateful ones have sealed it off. We don't have access to it. The Azaratna, the Shishu Bale Devava, right? And the court, and in its court, our enemies have are rejoicing. Okay, all of which sounds to me like we're talking about Tisha B'Av here. Okay, and not only that, because we're dealing with, right, because this is cross time and place. This is things that happened at night. All of these things, right? B'layla ha'hu. So it might remind you of a song that if you stay awake long enough, you might sing at the end of the Seder. That it happened b'chatzi halayla. So this is a similar kind of list of the various different things, or just if we just finished with Hanukkah not so long ago. Ma'oz Tzur isn't all about Hanukkah. There's only one verse in all of Ma'oz Tzur that's about Hanukkah. The rest of it goes, there's one verse that's actually about Purim, and there's a verse that's about Paro, and there are verses about all different kinds of things. Of course, it ends off with a verse about the final redemption as well. So here we are, and we have, okay. So now we're coming back to Paro as well. And furthermore, Paro u'Mitzrayim lo atzu alana kahada atzata. Even Paro and the Egyptians didn't make a counsel against us like that counsel. Umalchei amamaya la chashivu alana k'machshavta hada. Nor did the kings of the nations that we had to deal with until here, they didn't make an accounting of us like that thought. What was that thought? Lemeve atidin L'yom haden l'shet sayutna me'al ape ara. That it should be in the future, there should be this day where we should be completely removed, cut off, right? Karet, lashchit. That's what that verb is, the Aramaic equivalent, from the face of the earth. Yeah. The final solution. And Gile Razin Gilale Raza Danala Mordechai. And the one who reveals secrets revealed this secret to Mordechai. Di Gezerat Motana It Gazrat Al Dvet Yisrael. Okay, so Haman had his notion of a final solution. Those of you who know some of the stories about the Nuremberg trials, etc., and its connection to Purim, and the ones who got hung actually ended up getting hung that year, 1946, got hung on Purim. The Germans were also very much aware of their connection and at least spiritual descent from Haman and from Amalek. And so, I mean, like this is something was written no later than like the year 300. And you can the echo, like it's scary, the echoes that you hear, at least for me. It's like, even if it weren't cold, I would be having goosebumps right now. Okay. And it goes on, but the one who reveals secrets revealed this secret to Mordechai. Di Gzerat Motana it Gazrat al Dvet Yisrael, that a decree of death had been decreed against the house of Israel. And even we weren't even going to be sold as slaves and maidservants, rather we were going to be fully destroyed. Now we're back to that whole, okay, so that one was this big, very long piece, but we're back to continuing this litany of Bei Belel Yahu. And that night, Nadat Shinte de Kudshabrichu Mimroma. On that night, the sleep of God, of the Holy One, blessed be He, on high, was disturbed. And this is more typical, you'll see, this is typical more of Targum Rishon. You won't see this in Targum Sheni. And because in Targum Rishon, you're gonna hear sort of more parshanut rather than more stories. And so they say to you now, V'in lo ktiv haden kra la havat efshar l'memre. And if it weren't written, if this hadn't been written in a verse, one couldn't say such a thing, because how can you say that Akash Baruch Hu sleeps, right? Dichtiv. So what is it that makes it possible to say that God's sleep was disturbed? Because there's a verse that says, Ura lama tishon Hashem. Wake up. Why are you sleeping, oh God? Chas v'shalom. Leit kadamoy shena. Chas v'shalom. You can't say that there's such a thing as sleep by a Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? He's always aware, and like that doesn't make any sense. Kad chatyan beit Yisrael avad garme de kavat dami. But when Am Yisrael sins, they cause something to happen that is similar to sleep. Right? They cause God to turn his attention away. remember talking to somebody at one point and saying, somebody said, well, da, 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 and I'm like, I don't want to know about that. If you're telling me is that somebody's doing something bad and it's not something that I need to protect myself about, and it's not something that I need to know in order to protect somebody else about, so I want to know about it. Okay. Hopefully, and particularly if it's something between them and a Kadosh Baruch Hu, like if I have a way of sharing my joy in all things Jewish with somebody, that's great, and I'll do it. And if they can pick up the spark from me, and that causes them to look into following mitzvot, etc., wonderful. Okay, but it's not a guarantee, right? It's not a guarantee. And I don't want to know about that. And in some sense, that's what they're suggesting here, that's what it is about a Kodesh Baruch Hu. That when Am Yisrael sins, God, as it were, goes to sleep. He doesn't want to know about it. Okay? Because if he knows about it, he has to respond to it, and he has to do something about it. He doesn't want to. He wants to wait until they do tshuva, and much better to deal with them when they're returning to him than to deal with them when they're far away. And so that's basically the sermonizing that's going on here, right? And so it causes the state that's like sleep, Bramkad Avdin Ruute Lanaim Vladimir. But when they do, Ruute is not have to do with Ra, with evil. It's the Aramaic action. It's like Rava de Ravin. It's Ratzon. It's a time, right? When they do his will, then, and while the first pasuk they left in the Hebrew, this pasuk they translated into Aramaic. This is Lo Yanum V'Lo Yishan Shomer Yisrael. This is the Aramaic for that verse. Okay, so when Am Yisrael is like children to Kadosh Baruch Hu, and they create a ratzon by him, and they align themselves with his ratzon, so then we say about him that he doesn't sleep and he doesn't slumber. When they are chas v'shalom sinning, so then he enters a state that's like sleep, and he turns away and isn't paying, and is, as it were, not paying attention, as though he were sleeping. And you couldn't say that, they said, if it weren't for the fact that there was already a verse that said it. Otherwise, I couldn't come up with that. All right. And we're back to our litany. Be'Belel Yahu, on that night, Nadat Shinte de Mordechai Tzadika. Okay, now this is something that is very common of many of the Targumei, is that there are certain characters that show up, and they don't show up without their adjectival title, as it were, without their, okay. So Mordechai, it's Mordechai Hatzadik. Okay, and you never hear Haman's name without Rishia. It's Haman Harasha. You can't say Haman, it's Haman Harasha. And we heard similar things in Sefer Daniel, where Nebuchadnezzar was always Harasha. There are people who just, you said their name, and then they're so and so the tyrant. Certain adjectival kinds of things come along with the name, and so we're going to see that over and over again. They will not just give you the name. So we have Mordechai Tzadika. He's the tzaddik. The Hava Shahid v'lo Shachiv, the Hava Shachiv v'lo Damich. He was expecting something, right? And so he wasn't able to even lie down. And when he did lie down, he couldn't sleep. Why? In the case of Mordechai the Tzaddik, what had happened? The Havan Beit Yisrael Mikanshin V'Yatvin Kadamoi, because people of Am Yisrael had entered in and they were sitting before him. But Amrinle, and they spoke to him and they said, and this so much sounds like a couple weeks ago in the parsha, At garamta lana et kol bishata hada. You caused all this trouble for us, all this bad stuff for us. V'in at kamta min kadam haman Mashiach, right? Because it has to be Haman Mashiach. You can't just say Haman, right? If you would have stood up in front of Haman, the wicked one, ukrata, the sagadata, uskidata le, and if you would have bowed and prostrated yourself before him, la atat alana ko ta hada, none of this big trouble would have come upon us. Mativ Mordechai, for those people who are into Aramaic, a taf shin switches, it's like the Hebrew word meshiv. Mordechai responds, Vamarlon, and he says to them, Levusha diahava lavash haman rishia, Sairin aloy train salmin, chadmin kadamoy, chadmin batroy. The garment that Haman was wearing, the Haman the wicked, okay, was wearing, had illustrated upon it two images, one in the front and one in the back. V'in kamit uskidat le ishtachachit de'eflach l'tavat. And it would have been the case that if I would have gotten up and prostrated myself before him, I would have found myself in a position of having performed a worship, a prostration, which is a form of worship. So tavat is a word that we use in Aramaic all over the place, and Targumei also uses it to mean like avodah zarah. I happen to like the word a lot because if your Hebrew is good enough, you recognize the word ta'ut here. That part of what the Targumim do, because the Targum is not clearly, it's not a literal translation word for word. It could have been much shorter if all you wanted to do was to do a translation of this little bit over here, that one verse in the Megillah. Okay, we aren't even done, and we're working on this this paragraph, this long litany of things that happened at night. And so now we're back into the Purim story, or at least something that happened at night in the Purim story, whether it was actually that night or not. But Mordechai is accused by Am Yisrael of causing the problem. And in fact, the question is whether or not he was right. In Masachet Megillah, the sages in the Gemara question whether he had made the right choice. And so here, the authors of the Targum are putting that halachic question into the mouths of the people, and they're allowing Mordechai, as it were, to speak for himself and to defend himself and explain why he felt that he had no choice. Okay, because it's one thing to, there are times when we are requested to put our lives on the line for God. And if we fail, there's no earthly penalty, certainly. Probably not even a heavenly penalty, because God knows how hard that is. There are times when we have the option of being moser nefesh, of giving up our lives, but it's not that we would have been required to by Jewish law. And that becomes a very fine line to decide between, because there's there is a positive commandment that says that you're, that the mitzvot were given to you to live by them, chai behem, that lishmor et nafshotechem ma'od ma'od, doubles up on the ma'od, that you're supposed to take very good care of the life and health that God gave you. So it's a very fine line to say that there's a possibility for reshut, for a person making a choice to be moser nefesh when it's not required. And if what's going on is an act of reshut, for sure, you're not allowed to do it if it's going to put other people at risk. It's like you can be a tzaddik on your own back. You can't be a tzaddik on somebody else's source and put somebody else at risk. So I see that somebody put something into a chat. Okay. Gotcha. All right. Anyway, so this is this is now what Targumei is telling us about is this interaction. It's allowing Mordechai, as it were, to speak for himself, and he explains that he felt that it would be mamash avodah zorah, and avodah zorah is one of those things that you're required to be moser nefesh of. So therefore, I'm just trying, lost my spot. Okay. So therefore, that was his reason. Right? And if I would have gotten up and I would have prostrated myself, then I would have been, and this word, this tavata, so that's the other thing, is that that's a word for avodah zorah, but it's the Hebrew word for ta'ut, which is an error. In other words, the writers of the Targum are very, very clear that there's no reality to the avodah zarah. Okay, there's only one God. All of the Zoroastrianism with its duality and Christianity and all sorts of other things, and for sure, Hinduism and all these other kinds of religions are avodah zarah. But there's no reality. It's not like you're worshiping some other power that's parallel to God. It's happening because of an error in your thinking, basically. And so that's the word that gets used in Aramaic for other gods, Elohim Acherim. Anyway, so now Mordechai goes on and he says, "Va'atun yadin man defalach letavata yevad min alma hadin umitrad min alma deate." And you know that whoever worships these other gods, this in this mistaken fashion, is lost from this world and removed essentially from the coming world. And after he explained himself, and everybody then was quiet and they stopped holding him to blame for what Haman was doing. Be'Belelia, back to our litany. Be'Belelia, on that night. We don't have Hahu, but it's the same litany, Be'Belelia. Okay, that shinte de Haman. It wasn't only Mordechai who couldn't sleep, it was also Haman who couldn't sleep. The Havad Shahid v'lo Shachiv, Rahava Shachiv v'lo Damich. He was, looking, thinking, whatever, and he wasn't even able to lie down. And when he did lie down, he wasn't able to sleep. Why? Because he was setting up this, right, the gallows. I mean, we call it a gallows. The language that the Targum is using is the language that nowadays we use for a cross. People were not, when we talk about hanging somebody, whether it's in the whether it's like after a death penalty is performed and we display the body for a short time before we bury it. That's the only hanging that there is in Jewish law. But the hanging wasn't hanging with a noose by the neck until dead, like it was in the American Wild West. The hanging was they like literally hung somebody out to dry, as it were, basically on a cross. And they didn't give anything to eat or drink. And as he was dying, the birds and other animals would come and eat from him while he was still there. It's pretty gruesome form of death, and it could take several days. It wasn't something that happened quickly. And so Haman was preparing this sliva, this cross, to hang Mordechai on. V'la hava yada di l'nafshe havam not kenyate. But he didn't know what we do, that he was actually preparing it for himself. Be'Beliyahu, also on that night, okay, Be'Beliyahu, on that night, Nadat Shinta de Esther Tzadikta, okay, the sleep of Esther, the Tzadikah, the Tzadikas, was disturbed. Dahavan, Avadat Lachma La'ala Yad Haman, oops, Bishiruta Imalka Achashverosh, because she was making the bread to bring together, right, Haman in service along together with the king Achashverosh. Be'Beliyahu Nadat Shinte de Malcha Achashverosh Tipsha. Right? So you thought Malka was his title? No, his title is Tipsha. Okay, just like we have Haman Shia. So here we have Achashverosh Tipsha. Now we don't always. Earlier in the Targum, we heard Achashverosh also Rashia, that Achashverosh was evil. Here we hear Achashverosh being called the fool. Okay. So the sleep of the king Achashverosh was disturbed, and it's Achashverosh the fool. Dahava shahid v'la shachiv, ahava shachiv v'lo damich. He was thinking about things, looking forward to what's going on, whatever, and he wasn't even able, like, couldn't even bring himself to lie down. He was so disturbed in himself. And even when he did lie down, he wasn't able to sleep. Dinakad yate rucha denikta l'malche. L'chavtat yate kulelelia. And because there was this spirit sort of took hold of him that takes hold of kings, right? Because the hearts of kings are in God's hand. And it sort of kicked at him, right? It the whole night long. So he finally spoke out. It was getting closer to morning. He finally spoke out, and he said, L'kol Rav Vanoi, to all of his chieftains, his officers who were there, Ma da'achid la hanali, whatever it was that I ate, man, not sitting well with me. And whatever I drank isn't staying down. It's like the heavens are coming down on me, and I'm hearing noises. I don't know. And the heavens of heavens are raising their voices. What is this? Hey, Matnan. Right? He's having night terrors and he's hearing all sorts of things. Hey, Matnan, Amirad, Lemishbag, Medinta, La Shavket Long. Perhaps somebody said something about like to let go of the city, and I didn't leave it, or maybe, or Esther Vahaman Makavnin Lemiktal Yati, like whatever, like I have to leave. Why do I have to leave? I don't understand what's going on. Maybe the problem is that Esther and Haman are planning to kill me. Dela alat Esther Sheruta, that I didn't put Esther in charge. Imi, to be equal with me. Ella Haman bil Choldoi. It was only Haman, right? Only Haman had the position of power. I didn't give Esther power, and maybe so now they're planning on taking my power away from me, and it'll be Esther and Haman instead of me and Haman. Like, I don't know what's going on. He was becoming more and more paranoid, right? And this is something that we hear from various different Mefarshim. And so here it's brought directly in the Targum. Okay, back to our litany. Al Dachan Avram Yitzchak Yaakov Kadam Avuhon Dishmaya. The Zicharon, the memory of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov came before the King of Kings, their father who is in heaven. Dishtalach min maroma malachai malacha hu Michael, because there was sent from on high the angel, that's Michael, Rav Chayala, the army, the hosts, whatever, of Israel. He's the defender of Israel. V'yatev Bereshe, and he sat on the head of the king. V'nadad Yachin Tamine, and he wouldn't let him sleep, right? He's sitting there on his head, playing drums on his head. Can't sleep. Okay, Kule Lelia, that whole night, Adi Amar until he finally said to bring Targumei before him, Yad Sefer Dach Ranaya Milei. So the book Dachranaya Zichronot Milei Diyoma, the matters of the day, in other words, the Chronicles, the Divrei Yamim. It's just a translation here. Vahavan Karyan Be Kadam Malka Avde Dinehon, and they would read out of it before the king. So his servants, okay, would read out of it before the king. The Malche Kadamai, about the prior kings, about everything, right? They used to tell people who were having trouble falling asleep, having insomnia, count sheep. I can't think of anything, more boring than hearing, on this day, this person came and spoke to the king, and these people brought this much tribute. And I don't know if any of you ever read the Domesday Book, which is sort of a combination of a census and tax records. And every once in a while, there's something interesting in there. But, oh, man, there's nothing better to put you to sleep. Okay. And so whether he was having them read it to him so that he could go to sleep, or whether he was having them read it to him to see if there was something that he had not heard before that he needed to hear, is not clear from this version. Okay. And he's reading about the kings before him. V'yativ le'el min enoi Damaka, and and there was somebody who was sitting above, so that from where the king was sitting or lying, and looking up, he could see this. This is probably still Michal. It's probably still the angel. V'hava mistakel Malka, and the king looked. V'chaze kidmut gvar, and he saw something that was like the image of a man. Ane v'amarle, he raised his voice and he said to him, Lamalka, to the king, this image said to the king, Haman by Dnikta lach. Haman's coming to kill you. V'namli yate chilufach, and he wants to be made king in your place. Makdim b'tzafra, he's going to come early in the morning. Ubaye l'misha minach, gavra de parkach min mota, and he's going to request from you to be able to put to death a man who saved you from death. He's going to request from you this man who had saved you from death. And he wants to kill him too. Ella amarle, this is what you should say to him. Okay, famous words that we recognize in the Hebrew. What should be done to the man whom the king wishes to harm? And you'll see, and you'll see that he won't ask anything from you other than what? Levushin de Malka, royal clothing. The Kitra de Malchuta, and the royal and the crown of the kingdom. The Susaya de Rachiv Aloy Malka, and the horse, even the horse that the king rides upon. That he wants, right? What should be done for a person the king wants to honor? Not give him, a new domain, make him the baron of this or the duke of that, not give him titles, not give him, right, money or anything else. No, just give him all the appurtenances of being the king. You'll see that that's what he wants. Okay, that's the end of what Targum Rishon has to say to us on that very first verse. So now you understand why I said I'm only going to probably get through one chapter. First of all, I started a little late. Usually I think I started around Rosh Chodesh Shvat, and this year I'm starting Erev Tu B'Shvat, so I'm missing 2 times. Also, last year when we got through 2 chapters, we had 2 months between Tu B'Shvat and Purim because we had Na'adar Rishon, and this year we do not. So I'm hoping to get 1 chapter done this year. Even though it's only 14 verses, it's a short chapter, but I'm not sure we might get another couple of verses done, but we're now going to switch over and we're going to look at Targum Sheni. So Targum Sheni does this differently. Here it is. So this Targum Sheni is unfortunately not online, which is a little annoying. Not the end of the world, but just a little annoying. The Targum Sheni is not online. And so a good friend of mine has a lovely version of a Mikra Gedolot called Nechmad L'Mar'eh. Because if you look at the end of Sefer Shemot, if you have a Mikra Gedolot of Shemot, the end of Sefer Shemot, you're going to find the Megillah, usually with the first Targum. If you have one like mine, following all of Megillat Esther with the first Targum will be Targum Sheni, not parallel to the verses, okay? And then in my case, below that is a translation from the Aramaic, because Targum Sheni is written originally in Aramaic. It's obviously not exactly a translation, any more than what we just heard in Targum Rishon was not a translation. It was a drasa, okay, that was inspired by the verse. And the same thing is going to happen with Targum Sheni. Targum Sheni is going to be more storytelling. And we saw last year, we saw that they Targum Rishon often felt darker. And I think we saw that. You'll see that what we're going to hear in Targum Sheni is not going to be nearly as dark as what we just went through. Certainly not with intimations of the Shoah, whatever. But there's a translation that was done. Actually, I don't know when it was written. Patsheg and Haktav is more or less modern kind of Hebrew. They translated Targum Sheni, which is, again, it is a book, a story that's it's based off of the Psukim in the Megillah. It's not. It further explains it. Many of the things that are in it can be found in other collections of Medrash and Agarata. Some of it goes back to the Gemara and Megillah and other places, and there's some things that this may be the original source for them. But so these stories that we have are okay. I've lost track of what I was going to say. And I don't have anything more to drink. It's a problem. I don't know what I do with my. Oh, here's my water. I have something to drink. It's a good idea. Okay. Okay. All right. So we're going to hear Targum Sheni now. Right? And we have it in the Aramaic. It's a later Aramaic. It's a more Eretz Yisrael style Aramaic, but it's also probably at least 500 years later. So languages shift over time. The Aramaic of Daniel, Sefer Daniel, is not the same as the Aramaic of Targum Yonatan. It's a 500-year difference, okay? And it's not the same as the Aramaic of the Gemara Bavli or the Yerushalmi. And those two, by the way, are different dialects, but more or less at the same time, whereas some of these things are separated not only in space, but also in time. So we'll talk about that as we go through, because there are a couple of interesting words in here. But I picked up the wrong one. Excuse me. I need to cancel this. Yeah, I do. So with that, I need to cancel this. Let me just go back. I thought I had it open. Oh my. Absolutely not what I want to do. Hold on. Okay. Not interested in that. Okay. I have the wrong one open. I thought I'd gotten the right one open. Okay. And close this. Here we go. Okay. Better. There we are. Okay. So verse 1. Cancel. There we go. Okay. Verse 1. we saw how long it was in the in Targum Rishon. In Targum Sheni, it's much shorter. This is all that they have for verse 1. It's still much longer than what the Megillah itself had. Megillah itself was that one short verse, but this is shorter. And you hear Belel Yahahu, but you're not going to get this whole litany. Okay, Belel Yahu on that night, and I can share these photocopies that I made from Nechmad Lamara. I can share them with anybody who'll send me a text, either WhatsApp or email. I can share the text with them. Belel Yahu, Slikat, Kavilad Rivaya Devet Yisrael Lirikia. On that night, the cry of the youths of the house of Israel went up to the heavens. V'ishtamat l'kadam mare alma hech pal gadin v'izin. And it sounded to the master of the world, in other words, to Kadosh Baruch Hu, it sounded like the voice of kids and goats. You know, baby goats and adult goats. Okay. If that's intended to be a little bit of a sideways hint at the notion that they had been sinners and that they were being brazen enough to nonetheless turn to God, I'm not sure if that's intended or not. It doesn't seem to be the way that it's going, but why dafka to sound like a goat rather than to sound like a lamb bleating? I'm not sure. It is true that in a variety of places, Am Yisrael is compared to a goat, and usually because of Am Kshei Orah, because they're stubborn like goats are stubborn. But at any rate, here is a medrash saying that on that night, the cry went up. It sounded like goats and kids bleating. Ad nadadu kol angle maroma, until it disturbed all of the angels of the heavens. Now, this is one of the hints that this is a much later text, and also that it's an Eretz Yisrael style text. Angle sounds like angel. And in fact, it comes from, if you look in Jastrow, which is a really good dictionary for Aramaic, it says it comes from the Greek. So, like Yiddish in Germany and Yiddish in Poland and Yiddish in Hungary and Yiddish in the Ukraine are not the same Yiddish, and Yiddish in the United States is becoming a different Yiddish because it has a lot of English words added into it. So too, Aramaic, particularly the Jewish Aramaic, is not the same from place to place. In Bavel, the Aramaic had some Greek in it, but not a lot, and it had Persian words in it. In Eretz Yisrael, which was definitely had been under the control of the Greeks, but later was under the control of the Romans, the Aramaic has both Greek words and Latin words in it. And so that's one of the distinctions that you're going to see. So instead of calling them angels, we heard in Targum Rishon, we heard the angel Michal called Malacha. They were just called an angel. Here they're being called Angele, angels. So the angels of on high, messengers from on high, but here clearly it's the angels. V'kamo midbalin v'amrin elin le'elin. So midbalin is like, if you know Hebrew, it's like nivha. It's kind of like being in that state of a chicken with your head cut off, with the head cut off, right? You running around, but not knowing where you're going. Okay, you know, just being taken aback and not knowing how to respond. And then they said to one another, Dilma ata zimna lamahave alma charuv. Maybe the time has come for the world to be destroyed because they're hearing everybody's crying and wailing what's going on. Ha b'chein itkanshu v'azlu kadam Mariam. So after that, they gathered together, they went in and they went before the master of the world. Adi Ribbon Alma, Amar Lahon. God, as it were, raised up his voice to them, and he said to them, to these angels, Matin Kal Gyan Diana Shema. What's the sound of the kids, the baby goats that I'm hearing? Not Midat Rachamim. Okay, so one of these angels is called the measure of mercy. Midat Rachamim speaks. Okay? We're anthropomorphizing everything here. And this is what she said. La kal gajin anshma. It's not the sound of goats that you're hearing. Elahan kal rivaya devet Yisrael, but rather the voice of the youths of the house of Israel. Is damnu lemevik tilin al gzerat haman rishia. Okay, because they have been appointed to be killed according to the decree of the wicked Haman. Minyad itmale mare alma rachmin v'tivu al amen. Immediately, the master of the world was filled with. Now, I'm going to translate it because I'm doing it for myself. I'm going to translate it the way I normally would. Rachmin, that shorish means love. Tivu usually means chesed. I have a lovely dictionary, glossary, not so much a dictionary, and it's not organized alphabetically, it's organized according to psukim, and they point out exactly that this shorish means ava, and this shorish means chesed. The people who translated Targum Sheni into Hebrew. Okay, so we started with the Megillah, we get Targum Sheni, which is an expansion storytelling based off of the Megillah, and then we have Kacheg and Ktav, which is that's really a translation. It's not an expansion on Targum Sheni, it's a translation of Targum Sheni into more modern Hebrew, and they did choose to translate this as Rachamim V'tov, mercy and goodness. But at any rate, immediately the master of the world was filled with love and chesed, or was filled with rachamim and good mercy and goodness towards his people. Bamar v'vizayat situmata d'itchamta, and he said to tear up the signed decree. D'itchamta levish, because it had been signed for evil, for a bad end, al Beit Yisrael. It was bad for Am Yisrael, so we're going to tear it up. As opposed to what Mordechai heard, right, was that the decree had been signed on high, that it was a decree from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the way it worked out was it manifested itself in this world as a decree that Haman had signed and sealed with, Achashverosh's ring, but it really was from on high, because Am Yisrael had not gotten the message. The Beit HaMikdash had been destroyed. They were in Galut, and they still didn't get what they were supposed to be doing, and weren't doing tshuva the way they were supposed to be. And so God was like, okay, we're done. And that's part of what we heard in chapter 5. And we heard like a little bit of an echo of it in Targumei. But here, what we hear immediately is that this minyad immediately, Yan, that God says, okay, we're going to tear up the decree. Right? Because why? Because they were crying out like little kids. And, you know, frustrating as it can be when kids are crying and everything else, but it arouses mercy in us. It arouses our love. And so it arouses God's love. Ufaked le malacha di mamana al shigushta. Okay, so I'm laughing because I know what it means. And he said to tear up this decree that it was decreed for evil against Am, and he commanded. Now here they do use malacha instead of using angel, and he commanded the angel that was appointed on. So shigushta is like the Hebrew word bela, that running around with like a chicken with its head cut off. Okay, that sense of panic and not knowing where to turn and where to go, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. Okay, leading to a meltdown, basically. So little did you know, you thought it was only kids that got that way, or it turns out that there's an angel who's appointed over inducing that state in people and in societies. And so God commanded the angel who was appointed on inducing this state of panicky running around. And so it went down to earth, and it induced this state in Achashverosh. Right, because that's the sleep of the king was disturbed. And disturbed caused this restlessness in the sleep of the king Achashverosh. And so he got up early in the morning, like it was way too early. And his face was Nasis Apin, they translate as Panim Zoafim, angry face, right? It's the notion of got up on the wrong side of bed, because right. Amar l'shimshei sifra, and he said to the servants of the scribe's assistants, La'aita safra dechana pipimeyomaya, and to bring him this, right, Sefer Zichronot Divrei Yamim. It's the same phrase as these chronicles. Okay. That was the chronicles of everything that had happened in the daily lives of the daily and national lives of the kings of Persia and Media, not from the beginning of the world, but from the beginning of Persia and Media having kings and being power. The Kad Chaza Shimshei Safra Yat Ma Dahave Mordechai Dachave. I'm sorry, it's a chat. Dachave Mordechai Al Bigtam Materesh. And when these scribes' assistants saw that it opened up to the place where it told that Mordechai told about Bigtan and Teresh. Remember, those were the guys who wanted to kill the king. Hava Mahafeg Yatsime Safa. They tried to turn over the book. So whether it's a book that's on a scroll, and they were so Pitsime, they're translating into the Hebrew, they translate as doors of a book. And I'm sorry, books don't have doors. Books have covers. I'm like doors of the book. So I'm trying to think if they're like they tried to roll it back to a different place, if it was like a scroll like our Sefer Torah is, or whatever. They tried to turn it to a different section. So it's not clear to me exactly what this means, but because I'm not sure what the physical description of this book was. the volume, they tried to put away that volume and pull out a different volume. Anyway, at any rate, so they tried to get rid of that one. Because they didn't want to read it. V'hava rava min kadam mare alma, but it was the ratza, it was the will of the master of the world, meaning Kadosh Baruch Hu. V'itgolalu pitsimaya ve'alehon, and so it's itgolalu. So it sounds like it is talking about this, this thing that's on. In the Sefer Torah, we call them Eitz Chaim, but on these spindles, and it rolled back on its own. Vahavu mitkrin milaya min go pitzimaya kadamalka, and the words were read from between, in that section, right, from between those that section before the king. And again, you hear this language of like they were read on their own. The servants, the scribes' assistants didn't want to do the reading, and it got read on its own, right? So it's a very and so the king heard the story about Mordechai sending the message about Bigtan and Teresh and saving his life. The one detail that's not in here is that there's a medrash that very much says the same thing. That medrash says that the Simchei HaSofer were some of Haman's children. And so they really do, they knew that their dad had a thing against this Mordechai person, and they didn't want to read anything that was positive about Mordechai to anybody else. So I'm looking at the time, and it is already 4:20. So I don't think I can get enough more done in 10 more minutes, which is most time that I'm willing to let it go. So I think we're just going to hold it at one verse. I will show you, though, that it's not going to be so bad, because what happens next that's what the problem is. Here we go. What happens next is that here's verse 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? 9. 9 is longish again, but right, the next set of verses are much shorter in Targum Rishon. In Targum Sheni, they start, it'll be a little different. So we should very much be able to finish chapter 6. It's just that it took us one day to get through the first one. But I don't think that there's really any point in trying to rush into the next several verses. I think I'm just better off saying, okay, we're gonna hold it here, and we'll pick up with verse 2 next week. So whoever you are, Family K, do you have anything that you want, any questions you want to ask, anything you want to share? And otherwise I'm gonna stop the share, and if there isn't anything that anybody wants to say, then I'm going to.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you so much. This was so mind-blowing and so inspiring. I'm actually here in New Jersey, so thank you. This was a wonderful way to start my day. So thank you so much.
Wow. Okay. Very good. Well, I tried to make it late enough in the afternoon here that I might catch at least the East Coast. So I'm very excited to hear that. I'm very excited to hear that. Yeah, that's
it was
super.
A gift. It wasn't in my plans, but it was a gift. So thank you for sharing your brilliance, your insight, and your Torah.
Okay. So Emir Hashem, we'll be doing it the next 3 weeks. so that we, or at least for another 2 weeks. I'm not whether we're going to do it like that's like Tanit Esther Arab Forum. I'm not sure because you saw I needed to drink to be able to handle it. So I'm not sure about 4 weeks from today, but we'll see. But if I get it, and if I finish the chapter, I'm certainly not going to like get started and not finish the next chapter. I'm not sure whether or not all the recordings of the previous chapters are available. I know, like I said, there was a year I did chapter 1. That was also, it was more of a hug. And so it was other people's voices, the people who'd been learning Aramaic with me. Because that was more of a hug. And then the following year we did chapter 2 and 3, and it was mostly just me speaking. And the following year, last year, we did chapters 4 and 5. And so this year we'll do chapter 6, which gets us, we're into the home stretch.
Wow. I want to give you a bracha that it should be with a lot of siyata d'shmaya and bringing our hearts closer. Lavinu Shabbat Shemayim. So thank you for taking your stand in that.
Amen. Okay. Thank you so much.
Have
Have
a
wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you.
Okay.
Shana Tova. And
You
this
too.
was, I forgot to actually say it out loud. I wrote it, but I forgot to say it out loud.
Yeah.
I still don't know my brother-in-law's Hebrew name, but this is the yard site of my nephew, Binyamin Ben Andrew and Margalit, and his neshama should have an aliyah.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah.
So may it be a ripple effect, Ezras Hashem.
Thank you.
Thank you for your graciousness. Kol tov. Bye-bye.
Okay. Kol tov. Bye-bye.